Welcome to Breast Intentions, the podcast where we take off the bra of expectations and dive into honest, empowering conversations. We're your hosts, Nadine and Cynthia, two Canadian girls who swapped snow boots for flip-flops in the Cayman Islands. This is your space to feel seen, supported, and a little less alone. So grab a cup of coffee or a glass of champagne and get ready for your weekly handful of truth, wellness, and empowerment. Welcome back to Breast Intentions. In this episode, we're joined by Dr. Tanya Morin, a naturopathic doctor who specializes in uncovering the deeper causes behind chronic symptoms. We explore mycotoxins and how they can quietly impact women's health, reminding us that what we often attribute to hormonal shifts may be part of a bigger picture. Dr. Morin shares why true healing means looking at the whole person.
So today on Breast Intentions, we have Dr. Tanya Morin. Welcome, Tanya.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Thanks for being on. And I know that both you and I had met a little while ago, and one of the things that we ended up talking about was how the words perimenopause and menopause are being used a lot in the industry, and it's becoming more widely known. And with that, we can also find that the words are being used almost too much. And in respect to when there's symptoms and when people are struggling with something, we find that more and more people are chalking it up to, oh, it's perimenopause, oh, it's a menopause symptom. But there can also be some times where it's another symptom of something else and something else that is underlying. So today we're going to have you on and just talk a little bit more about perimenopause and menopause, but also how people can be aware of some of these symptoms and they can mean something else. So we'll get into that in a little bit, but first maybe I'll have you give us a little bit of an introduction and where you're at and what it is that you do.
Excellent, yes. Well, I'm Dr. Tanya Morin. I am a naturopathic doctor and I am practicing in Red Deer, Alberta, Canada. And so I did my schooling down in Arizona at the naturopathic college down there and have been here in Red Deer for about almost 7 years practicing. And my practice has changed a lot over the years. It definitely started very, 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 I would like to say, just treating symptoms for, what people were coming in for. But as I was, working with clients and, supplements were either working, but then they would stop working, or, the supplements that really, should be working weren't actually doing what we needed them to do, I started having to go deeper and then deeper and then deeper. And so my whole goal as a naturopathic doctor is to kind of really figure out, well, what is at the root cause of what's causing our symptoms? Because the body is so complex and there's often so much overlap and nothing really exists in isolation. And so oftentimes we can see, of course, symptoms popping up in, one area of the body, but it's driven by something else in a completely different system.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think it's almost like peeling off that Band-Aid, or actually, I think what they say is like peeling back the onion.
Yeah, the layers
and
of the onion.
And then you have another layer. Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So do you work mainly with women, men, children?
All
the above?
Yeah, most patient populations. Of course, lots of women in my practice, lots of kiddos in my practice. When I first started practicing, I spent a lot of time working with kiddos. Preventative medicine is something that's really important to me, and I think that a lot of that actually starts in childhood, of some of the habits that we're building with our food and our lifestyle, our movement, and our sleep. But of course, as I've gotten into more complexity, now I would say a lot of my practice is really focused on very chronic illness, and that's more so popping up in, I feel, adult populations as compared to kiddos, but there's definitely some kiddos that absolutely are, falling into that as well.
Okay. And you do have a concentration in menopause and working with women in menopause as well.
Yes.
So going towards that, what is your take on this new wave of conversation?
Great question. So this conversation has definitely been, long overdue. And, I think there's been, in my early years of practice, women were coming in, they were feeling, very confused, very isolated, very dismissed about, what was going on in their body as they were starting to experience a lot of these symptoms. I think there was a lot of silence around what was kind of going on, as well as a lot of stigma, both with, culturally, but also with, other healthcare providers. And so it left a lot of confusion. And so now that we're seeing people more open to talking about this, I think it's, finally giving the awareness that it's actually needed, And we're starting to look at, menopause as this very significant and valid life transition. Of course it can be challenging, and of course it can be complex for women, both, emotionally, mentally, physically. But as we start to bring more awareness to this, I think it helps to provide a lot more clarity about what's going on, as well as those options for women about how they actually can receive the support that they need.
Right.
Yeah.
So now if we're looking again at menopause and what it was that I was saying at the very beginning, looking at symptoms and clients or patients that are coming in to see you that may be struggling through menopause or may have symptoms that are menopausal symptoms, where do you start when you're looking at these symptoms or you're talking to them about these symptoms and you can actually see, do you know what, I think we need to look into this further because this may not actually be a menopause symptom?
Yeah, so where I think this gets really tricky is, of course, like menopause and perimenopause can often kind of amplify what's kind of been going on underneath, right? And so when we start having hormonal changes in the body, estrogen and progesterone are changing and fluctuating, this can put a lot more strain on other body systems and other organ systems that were, potentially a little bit weaker. And so, it can be really, really, really common for women as they're going through menopause for their thyroids to start to go out of balance, right? Estrogen has a significant impact on the thyroid. And as estrogen levels are, declining, then this can actually really impact what's happening with thyroid functioning. And so, just the other day I was actually chatting with one of my friends, and they're going through a separation, and so huge source of stress for them in their life, right? And so they're losing weight, they can't sleep, they're having anxiety and heart palpitations, and this was really just chalked up to stress and actually perimenopause by their providers. And I mean, when we zoom out on that, that does make sense. However, after deeper investigation, it actually turned out that she was actually dealing with Graves' disease, which is, autoimmune hyperthyroidism. So, yes.
So it could have been something that was just chalked up to perimenopause when it was actually something else that does need a lot of attention and care.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And so the heart palpitations she was having, the insomnia, the weight loss, it was due to a very real physiological condition that was going on that needs medication, that needs actual medical intervention, not just deal with your stress and, move on with it.
Right.
Yeah.
And so what would be some other things that a woman would present as symptoms that may chalk it up as menopause or perimenopause that might be something else?
So one of my areas that I often see contributing a lot, and we can see a lot of overlap in symptoms, is mold and mycotoxins.
Okay.
Yeah. And
tell us a bit more about that as well.
Yeah.
I think, and do you know what? And one of the things that I do want to say, sorry for interrupting.
That's okay.
Is with us being in the Cayman Islands, mold is big.
Yeah.
Right? And I don't really know what it's like in Canada or anything like that, but it wasn't really anything that I was aware of as someone who lived in Canada, but definitely a lot more aware down here. So what is all of that? How does it present? What is mycotoxins?
Yeah, so welcome to the rabbit hole of mold. This runs so deep, but it's such an area of passion of mine, so I'm very excited to be able to, bring a little bit more awareness to this.
Okay.
So mold is, of course, very prevalent in our environment. There's really no way, in my opinion, to completely avoid mold.
Okay.
But what mold does, and not every mold is going to be the same, right? There's some molds that are totally benign, but of course there are going to be molds that can be quite toxic to our health. So some of these molds, they create what are called mycotoxins. And mycotoxins, they are extremely dysregulating to 3 areas of our body. The first is the nervous system. And so when these mycotoxins kind of are in our body, and they're creating a lot of chaos, they keep our nervous system in this kind of hypervigilant state. And when our nervous system is in a hypervigilant state, it doesn't detoxify well, it doesn't heal, it doesn't repair, it doesn't prioritize, nutrient absorption. And so even from that alone, we can start to see, a whole host of problems starting to pop up.
Okay.
The second thing that mycotoxins do is they significantly dysregulate our immune system. So from an immune system standpoint, we can see sometimes this overactivation of the immune system, where we're getting a lot of inflammation created, but we're also getting a lot of histamine created, which is one of those kind of chemicals kind of made by the immune system. And so this can really closely be related to mast cell activation syndrome or histamine intolerance. And linking this back to menopause, histamine creates a lot of heat. It can create a lot of flushing. It can create a lot of redness. It can create a lot of itching and inflammation. And so when we're looking at menopause and we're having these hot flashes and we're maybe having this itchy skin and we're having this insomnia and an anxiety, well, all of that can also be caused by histamine as well. And what I find really, it is quite interesting. And what I find also is quite interesting about this is, when we take a look at Midol, which is, one of those medications that's, women commonly use premenstrually, for cramping and pain and their PMS symptoms. Not only does it contain analgesic medications, so pain-relieving medications, there's also antihistamine in there as well. So it kind of goes back to, okay, well, if that is a therapy that's helping, why is that therapy helping? Is it actually because it's working on histamine? So then what's really driving this histamine response in the body? And of course,
because there is the link between when the estrogen decreases, the histamine increases as well.
Yes.
So it's like figuring out what is the problem.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And when we're having these fluctuating estrogen levels and we're having these fluctuating histamine levels, then we're not having that same kind of buffering that's kind of going on that maybe we had previously. Right? So then as women are going through this transition, now we're seeing that really amplified for them. And so then this, it gets really tricky because with the, activation of the immune system, we can also see it kind of starting to trigger sometimes even, autoimmune conditions, or, it's really kind of suppressing the immune system. The third thing that mycotoxins do is they really disrupt our body's ability to detoxify. And if we're not able to properly detoxify, that is also really going to impact what's happening with our hormones, right? Healthy hormone balance.
Yeah.
Really,
everything gets stuck.
Really relies on, that proper detoxification of those hormones so we can have a better balance overall. Because if we have way too much estrogen compared to, progesterone, that's going to make those symptoms a lot worse for a woman as they are kind of navigating this transition.
Okay.
Yeah.
So mycotoxins is mold?
Mycotoxins are the toxins that are created by mold. Yes.
Okay. And you can actually do a mycotoxin test?
You can.
Yes. Okay. Because that is actually on my list of things to do.
Yes.
Yeah. That
It's,
sounds like a great idea.
Yeah. Especially with just living down here too.
Yeah.
Right? And I'm pretty positive that you can get them down here too.
Yeah.
So, okay.
And does that test that just says like if it's present in the body, like is that like a yes no or
Great
what does that
question.
look like?
A level?
Yeah. So there's two different companies out there that I'm really familiar with, and both of the companies, they do have overlap between the toxins that they're testing for, but there are some differences. So what these tests are looking at, so it's a urine test to see are there these mold toxins in your urine. And if there are these mold toxins in your urine, well, they're coming from somewhere in your body. Right? So where this gets a little bit tricky is, well, is it coming from our environment? And then we're detoxing those mold toxins because of, what we've been exposed to in our environment. Or has mold actually come into our body and started to create its own little home there? And now we're kind of our own little mold producing factory. Right?
That can happen?
Yes. And so this is where it gets really, really, really tricky because a lot of people, they're like, well, I'm not, I'm living in a brand new house. I'm living in a brand new house. Like, how can this still be impacting me?
Yeah.
Sometimes we've had, people who, grew up in farmhouses and, they moved out of their farmhouse when they were 11 years old. And now we're seeing them being, impacted by these symptoms, years, decades later, because, mold has kind of created its own little home in the body. And it's not something that's like inherently so much of a threat that it's going to make us quote unquote, sick right away. I find it's, super opportunistic. And so when we have higher levels of stress, or maybe our immune system's, a little bit lower because, we're sick, or, we're dealing with, disrupted sleep schedules because like you have a work project, or we're dealing with kiddos who are running around, then it gives mold a little bit more of an opportunity to kind of start to quote unquote take over, and then we get a little bit more and more mycotoxin being produced. And then, we're slowly adding to that bucket. And then over time, that bucket's really kind of filling up. And then all of a sudden, it's spilling over. And so there's maybe not a specific point in time where things got worse. It was just kind of this gradual cumulative effect over many, many, many years, which now ultimately, there's so many different things that are out of balance.
Right.
And now it just feels like we're playing whack-a-mole with all of our symptoms.
And from a detoxification side, when I'm talking to my clients, particularly the ones that I do the DNA for, one of the things that I always say to people is think about your body as turning on a tap and that tap is pouring into your body, and your detoxification is kind of like a colander with all of the little holes, where your colander might be, those holes might be a little bit more plugged up. And so if those holes are plugged up and you're pouring in, so let's say that you are living in a home that does have maybe higher mold, or you do have the mold in your system and now it's accumulating, that bowl is going to start to spill over.
Absolutely.
And spill over and spill over. So kind of like what you were saying is the 3 areas. One of those areas is the detoxification, where we now have to figure out how to detoxify. And so when you have a mycotoxin test and it says you have X amount of mold or mycotoxins in your system, where do you go with someone with that? Because I'm going to assume that you initially get a patient that comes in presenting symptoms, and at that point you have to figure out, which way do I go? Is this actually menopause, perimenopause symptoms, or is this a mycotoxin thing? Like, how do you know? I guess that's your job.
Yeah. So
You do know.
yeah, this is really not a straightforward question to answer, because it depends, right? And so when women, are coming into me, with these concerns, we're taking a look at like the whole picture, right? As a naturopath, I dive into, every single organ system with my clients, asking them, questions related to its functioning and symptoms within those systems, even if that's not what they're coming in for as their primary concern. One of the other things that I also really like to kind of understand is, okay, well, what was kind of going on like before this all started? Like, tell me the timeline. And even though, perimenopause, menopause might be, the thing that's on their radar because of, their age and, what's being kind of talked about online, and this like new wave of conversation that's really popping up, it makes sense that they're going to be having symptoms, or they could be having symptoms, but it's just, putting on a little bit more of that investigator hat and saying, okay, well, yes, we have these symptoms, and here's what we can do to support them, but what is ultimately driving it really kind of depends on each person.
Right.
And it also, I think, really depends on what women have really tried as well. Because sometimes I have women coming in and they've tried, everything. They've tried the supplements, they've seen, different providers, and it doesn't really feel like anything is working.
Oh, okay.
And that would be a little bit more of a clue for me to say, okay, well, let's dive a little bit deeper. If I have a woman who's coming in and they're having, mild symptoms, am I going to jump to, mycotoxins right away? Probably not. Because sometimes we do just need a little bit of that physiological support for the body. And I do, firmly believe that when we are given the right environment, the body can heal. Right? And so some people, they can detoxify mycotoxins very, very, very well, right? They just need a little bit of extra support with the physiology, the balance of the hormones to actually, settle down their nervous system so that the nervous system can start to take care of that on its own, right? We might need to do a little bit of liver support to help to balance their estrogen a little bit more. And by doing a little bit of liver support, maybe that is helping to clear some of these excess, toxins that maybe are or aren't there.
Okay. So just for the people that are listening and the people that may not necessarily be well-versed in the mycotoxins, what are the symptoms of both, like perimenopause and menopause and mycotoxins? Like, where do they overlap? Because we know when we've done episodes before, there are a lot of symptoms when it comes to perimenopause and menopause. Where does the overlap come with mycotoxins?
everywhere.
Is it really?
Yeah.
So it can be like you were saying, the histamine issue. Is it like weight gain? Is it
All of it.
It's everything.
Yes. And it's
Okay.
I find it can be everything because of how these really, impact the nervous system, and because of how these really impact the detoxification system. But also some of these mycotoxins actually act like estrogen as well.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so it does make it really tricky to differentiate, because mycotoxins can cause anxiety. They can cause insomnia. They can cause heavy periods. They can cause irregular periods. They can cause cramping. They can cause weight gain. And one of the big things that I find with weight gain is that if women are really struggling to lose weight, I often find that there can be a toxicity component to it. Because if we're not detoxifying well, like everything our body does, I believe is actually protective.
Oh,
And yeah. And so if we have all of these toxins floating around the system, which can create chaos in so many different ways, our body's going to try to put them away. So where does it put them? I always say it puts it in our junk drawer. And so then we're doing, all of these things, try to lose weight, right? We're starving ourselves, going to the gym for however many hours a week, right? Being whatever that is. But if the body doesn't have a way to get these toxins out of the body, it's ultimately not going to give up those fat cells.
Yeah.
And so it can become really frustrating for women when they feel like, they're trying everything, they're very regimented with their diet, they're eating well, their fiber, their protein, they're hydrating, they're moving, they're doing, all the things that they're told they should be doing. But for whatever reason, they're not seeing things move.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, would you also say that if you do have someone that comes into you that, let's say, is going through menopause, and they can also have the mycotoxins in their body, is that how you say that?
Yeah.
So then if you were able to, so they have all of these menopause symptoms, they do have the mycotoxins, you start getting rid of the mycotoxins, would you say that it can actually lessen the symptoms of menopause?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So they can go hand in hand.
They definitely
but
can go hand in hand.
One can magnify the other.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Both ways, would the
Yeah,
mycotoxin increase the menopausal symptoms and menopausal symptoms increase the one?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
as, hormones shift with menopause, right? Now we have that decline in estrogen, which makes, histamine go wild. We also have that decline in estrogen that's really impacting what's going on with our brain chemicals, our neurotransmitters. So we're not maybe able to buffer that stress as well. We have disruptions, what's going on with our sleep schedule. Our progesterone's declining, and so progesterone's really calming, right? And so as we have that decline in progesterone, and we're maybe not feeling as calm as we maybe used to, now we're just not having, there's no chill to that system. And when our system feels like it's on fire, well, then that's going to amplify what's happening, of course, with the mycotoxins as well, because now, again, the mycotoxins are, toxic to the nervous system. And so they spiral together. And it's kind of like this chicken or the egg scenario, well, which one is doing what? And arguably, they're both problematic. It's just, where do we get in to actually help to support the body in an efficient way that's going to help with symptoms, but also, address what's driving that dysfunction in the first place.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
It is very interesting. Like I said, welcome to the rabbit hole. It goes so deep. Yeah.
Okay, so mycotoxins are mold.
They come from
And
mold, yeah.
can come from the environment or can come from within you. How do they get in you?
Well, it's just like how anything else gets inside of you, right? So viruses, bacteria, they come into our system. Same thing with molds, right?
Just from the environment somehow, from something we've eaten, from just being in our house, from being in the outside.
Generally,
Just somehow. And then it just kind of can lay dormant, or it can be affected by, say, stress or other things and increase.
Yeah.
Okay.
Have a little party.
Have a little party, yeah. At your expense.
Unfortunately, yes.
Okay, so those are, mycotoxins are mold. Are there other toxins that we should be concerned about or that are out there as well that could be affecting us?
So, I mean, really, we do live in a relatively toxic world, right? When we start taking a look at toxins, this can be, of course, the mold toxins, but it can be, toxins that are, found on our food, of what gets sprayed on our food.
Right.
Yeah, right.
Toxins in our food, right? Whether that's antibiotics or synthetic hormones. This can be toxins that, come from where our food is stored, so stored in plastics. It can be our cleaning products, our body care products, makeup. It can be, flame retardant that's like sprayed onto our clothes and mattresses. So there's a lot of different places that this can really kind of come from. And a lot of these toxins, they actually do disrupt our endocrine system.
Yes.
So they're called endocrine disruptors. And so they'll either act like hormones or they'll block our hormones from actually being able to do their job. But then they also really gum up our detoxification pathways as well. And so again, it goes back to, like what Nadine was saying, right? If we have, these smaller holes in our bucket to clear toxins, and now all of a sudden we're plugging them up or gumming them up because we've had a, lifetime of exposures to these chemicals, or maybe genetically we're a little bit of a slower detoxifier. Genetically, it all can start to add up.
Mm-hmm.
And disrupting the endocrine system is estrogen. Like it plays into your estrogen, right?
Plays into your estrogen, but I can also find it can impact what's happening with your insulin, so the hormones that, help to balance blood sugar. They're also inflammatory, right? And with inflammation, we also see like blood sugars go up. And then that's going to call for more insulin. And then that's going to call for more cortisol.
Yep.
And then
all the things.
Yeah, and it all just starts to unfortunately spiral together because none of these things really work in isolation from each other.
Okay.
And then what I think is also, can be challenging is, I'll often see women come in and they've had hormone testing done. And their hormones, look quote unquote normal, but they've had blood work done for their hormones. And so their hormones in their blood look perfect. And that's even from, a naturopathic perspective where I'm looking at, hormones from an optimal reference range. But we're still seeing a lot of the signs and symptoms of low hormones. And what I think that's happening there is we have enough hormone, quote unquote, in the blood, but that hormone isn't actually getting into our cells to do its job. So that hormone's being blocked for whatever reason. And that can be from toxins, that can be from inflammation, that can be from all sorts of things. So it almost creates this, like, I'm going to say hormone resistance, where we have enough. It's just, for whatever reason, that hormone can't do its job.
So is that why the mycotoxin test is done through urine? Or no?
You can do it through blood, but
Okay.
typically we just do it through urine because it's an easy thing for people to collect.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is there a test for these other toxins?
There are some functional labs that do some environmental, like, pollutant testing. I myself personally haven't utilized a lot of them because there's kind of an order of operation that I kind of look at and utilize when I'm working with clients. And I find that mycotoxins usually need to be addressed first. And so if I'm trying to, detoxify all of these other toxins or even heavy metals, and mycotoxins are there, that needs to be dealt with first because they impact the detoxification of so much other stuff.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it's very important and very good for us to be aware that there are all of these other things that can be toxic, I suppose. And if we wanted to, if we wanted to be aware of these and we wanted to reduce the toxic load, but it does sound overwhelming. Like when you start to say it's in our food, it's in our clothes because of what it's sprayed with, our food is what it's sprayed with, our candles that we have in our bio. So it does feel a bit overwhelming. Is there a recommendation that you can give for where to begin? What should we be looking at?
Yeah, so the overwhelm is so real. I remember when I was in school and we were doing our environmental medicine class, like, I'm pretty sure I just, like, did not leave my house for 3 days after
Right.
all of this because I was so scared about, like, going to the grocery store and even buying my organic groceries because the receipt that they're going to give me has, like, BPA on it. And so, yes.
But even receipts, like I think I've read that the receipts that we get at the store are endocrine, whatever the terms are not good.
Yes, absolutely. And so, like, we could very much drive ourselves mental just trying to avoid, all of these toxins. And that's also not helpful, right? Because if it's creating more stress for us, well, guess what? Our body doesn't detoxify when it's under stress.
Right.
It really doesn't prioritize that. So what I usually say is, focus on, of course, like, your deodorants, your cleaning products, and like your water bottle. Okay? Switching your water bottle out to glass, metal can make a huge difference. Anytime we're eating anything in plastic, especially if it's been heated, this can be problematic. So swapping out those containers. And it doesn't all have to be done at once, right? Like, we can, as we're utilizing up different products, we can swap it out for something that is maybe a little bit cleaner, right? There's a couple different apps. There's, like, the Environmental Working Group app, EWG. There's one that's called Yucca, and there's one that's called Think Dirty. I love the Yucca app because you can actually just, like, go and you can actually scan the barcode on the products, and it'll give you, like, a nice easy score to kind of say, is this a cleaner product or is this a little bit more of a quote-unquote toxic product? So
that's really cool. That's helpful.
it's so helpful. It's so helpful. So, like
if I'm looking for a new water bottle and I'm at the store and I'm like, okay, out of these 5, which one is more clean or less toxic? I can scan and potentially see.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit more designed for like body care products and cleaning products as compared to, like, plastics and that stuff.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm just thinking, I am aware of this, obviously, and I switched out my water bottle, and I have steel, I think it is, metal, steel, whatever, steel water bottle, but the straw is plastic.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
So that's probably not great.
Yes. 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 That's literally my conundrum I have every single day with my water bottle as well.
Right? And I really just realized this the other day. I was like, I don't think these two things are good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
A question about that as well, because my child had said something to me. So then what is BPA? Like, if it's BPA free, then is it an endocrine disruptor or?
Yeah. Is it really BPA free, I think?
Well,
Like, so is there standards in terms of like what is BPA free, and you can slap that on there and it still can cause issues?
so I feel
we putting
like
you
a
on the
lot of the
spot here?
BPA. Yeah, so I haven't looked into this in like a lot of, you know, great detail. So I'm just going to preface with that because I don't know for certain. But what I have kind of seen and heard is a lot of the BPA plastics are being replaced with a different type of plastic, which do we have
It's still
research on how
plastic.
that plastic really impacts
Right.
us from a, you know, endocrine disrupting standpoint? I don't know,
Okay.
right? So plastic.
I think the overall takeaway for me is try not to use plastic if you can avoid it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I did have someone else ask me the other day, which I think you may have answered this, is plastic in the freezer. Because everyone concentrates a lot on like the plastic and putting it in the microwave. But does it do the same thing if it's in the freezer?
That's a great question.
Yeah. I never thought of that.
Yeah. I wasn't really sure how to answer that. Someone had asked me that the other day. I'm like, I actually don't know.
Yeah, that's a really
So
fascinating
it probably
question.
goes back to the answer before, where it's just like, just don't use any plastic.
Yeah.
Let's
If
just
you can,
avoid it all.
if you can avoid it.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, and then there's of course this like whole microplastic thing, which is a whole other, I think, rabbit hole.
Oh, I have seen some stuff show up about that.
Yeah, so maybe we'll say that for another day.
Here, go down. Yep, another rabbit hole with that one.
For sure. Cynthia, what were you going to say?
So I think, I guess, some things that we can just do in our daily life is to try to make these swaps, right? Like swap out plastic for glass. Pay attention to the makeup you're using, like read the labels, read the deodorant labels, maybe not use candles. I've heard that burning candles, depending on the type of candle it is, can't be great either.
Supposed
that-
to go for like soy or something? Soy candles?
I mean, I love me a good candle, I'm not going to lie. But like anytime I think we're burning anything and then we're inhaling that, I don't know if it's that much better. However, if there's, you know, a lot of synthetic fragrance in the candle, I think that's going to be, you know, a really increased burden compared to, you know, something that's a little bit more, you know, naturally scented from essential oils. Actually, interesting, you know, really note about, you know, even essential oils. You know, I love essential oils. But sometimes even essential oils can be essential oil fragrance. So it can be labeled as, you know, lavender essential oil, but when you look at, say, the ingredients on the back, it's lavender fragrance.
Oh, that's interesting.
It can be really interesting. And so there can sometimes be a little bit of like sneakiness, I find, around that. And this was actually really interesting.
During midlife, perimenopause, menopause, there's a lot going on in a woman's body. How do you see the nervous system playing a role in how symptoms show up?
Yeah. So I have touched on this a little bit, but I'm glad we're able to dive into a little bit more. I personally think the nervous system is really foundational in how symptoms are showing up and really how intense they feel for women. What I always say is the nervous system, it kind of sets the tone for that symptom sensitivity. So when our nervous system is more calm, when it's more regulated, it gives us more capacity to, handle changes. And when our nervous system is kind of stuck in a chronic state of stress, it will amplify these hormonal fluctuations and it will exaggerate every symptom, in my opinion. And so when our nervous system is in this kind of constant state of fight or flight, the body deprioritizes repair. It deprioritizes detoxification. It deprioritizes digestion. It deprioritizes, a lot of those quote unquote maintenance things that the body needs. And so now if we're not absorbing our nutrients from our food, well, how are we going to actually create proper hormones? How are we going to get those, vitamins and minerals to actually help to create those brain chemicals that we need to help us feel calm, to help us feel regulated? And so the analogy, that I often give to clients is, there's two modes our nervous system really operates in. And this is, of course, like a very oversimplification of it. But there's that fight or flight, and then there's, rest, digest, and what I say, reproduce. And so if we are, quote unquote, running from a tiger because we're in fight or flight, the last thing our body's going to want to do is make a baby. Right? And so, when we talk about stress, what I also think is really important to emphasize is, yes, stress can be a lot of these, external stressors, right? Relationship, finances, what's going on with our job. But where I think stress gets overlooked is these internal stressors as well. And so these internal stressors can be, things like toxicity. It can be things like nutrient deficiencies. It can be as simple as, dehydration, gut microbiome imbalances, food sensitivities. And so even though we may not, quote unquote, subjectively have a lot of external stress, if our body systems are feeling that internal stress for a variety of reasons, it definitely can keep that nervous system in that constant, hypervigilant fight or flight state. And so, if we are running from a tiger and we've spent, the majority of our life running from a tiger in some way, shape, or form, a lot of these symptoms are going to make sense. You're going to be exhausted. You're going to be irritable. You're going to feel anxious that a tiger is going to come out and eat you. You're going to be edgy. You're going to want to crash on the couch at the end of the day. You're not going to be able to focus on what your boss has to say, what your partner has to say, what your shopping list is. We can't focus and remember things clearly when our nervous system doesn't think it's safe to do so, because it's trying to prioritize that survival, right? Your body's going to be hot. Your body's going to be sweaty, right? If you go for a run on a treadmill for 5 minutes, oh my gosh, I'm already dying of heat and I'm sweating. And so you're going, these symptoms start to make sense, right? And so this is what I mean when I say that how our nervous system is operating really sets the tone for how we're going to experience it. And the more calm and regulated we are, it's going to help to kind of bring those symptoms down.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And in past episodes, we've talked about nutrition and how, eating a balanced diet is important, and also exercise. If you are stressing yourself out, your body out at the gym, that can also play a role. And these are, not I wouldn't say, no, I'm not stressed, but really I'm
putting my body in a stressed state daily if I'm doing these things, like under eating, under eating or over exercising. Also could be added to that list, I'm sure.
Absolutely. And even like hydration, like
Yeah.
how many of us are just like, running on, however many cups of coffee a day and not enough water?
It's crazy how I can fit 5 cups of coffee a day, but 5 cups of water are a lot harder.
Right. And so like, think about like a sponge, right? Like if you have a dried sponge and you're trying to clean your dishes with a dry sponge, like good luck.
That's a good analogy.
It is not going to work very well, right?
Right.
And so like,
I would say that's probably the last thing I would think about if somebody said, well, what are you missing? What's going on? Like, but it probably is one of the number one ones that I struggle with is getting enough water every day, which seems so simple. And it's right there on my desk. I don't know. I can't explain it.
You're not alone. You're not alone in that.
Big mystery of life.
Yes.
But I really would not be like, well, that's why my symptoms are a bit worse today, or that's why XYZ. But it's true. Yeah. It's huge.
Huge. Huge.
Yeah. Okay. Let's switch now to ADHD, because ADHD in women is becoming more recognized or more talked about now in midlife for us, like it being, I guess, increased with perimenopause or menopause. What's the connection between hormonal changes and symptoms that look like ADHD?
Yeah, great question again. So as hormones decline, hormones do work hand in hand with what's going on with a lot of our brain chemicals.
Right.
And so progesterone it works on our GABA receptors. And so GABA is a really like kind of calming, anxiolytic brain chemical. And so progesterone will also kind of mimic that, right? Same thing goes with estrogen. Estrogen works hand in hand with serotonin. It works hand in hand with norepinephrine, that kind of adrenaline hormone. And it also works with dopamine. And so when we're talking about, ADHD, the big hormone or the main neurotransmitter I typically think of is dopamine. But also like serotonin's going to play a role in that for like mood and emotional regulation. Same thing with GABA for that like calming kind of anxiolytic piece. And so as estrogen levels decline, it does impact what's happening with these neurotransmitters as well. And so when estrogen declines, it impacts what's happening with dopamine, which is really that brain chemical that we need for, focus, concentration, actually feeling like we want to, execute a task and like get it done. It's that like desire to actually feel accomplished from, doing the simplest task. And so when these hormones decline or when they're fluctuating, it really does impact what's happening with these neurotransmitters. So we can again see a lot of overlap in the symptoms. And is it really a, true ADHD? It's always hard to say, right? Because symptoms can often look and feel very similar.
So just the same as the mycotoxin?
Just the same as the mycotoxins, yes. And so, like the estrogen, it plays a role in the dopamine synthesis. It plays a role in how it's kind of being utilized in the body and in the brain. And so it makes sense that when these hormones drop, we do see more symptoms kind of popping up from it. And then there's also this piece that's kind of like related to, I think, that nervous system dysregulation is that like when we're in quote unquote survival mode, the last thing we kind of prioritize is, complex thinking, remembering things, concentrating and focusing because we're really kind of worried about when is the tiger going to show up to potentially eat me.
Right.
Yes. And then I also think that there's a significant lifestyle piece, right? And so I always say the amount of kind of dopamine that's kind of flooding our brain in the morning really kind of sets the tone for the amount of dopamine the brain is going to want for the rest of the day. So it's like, what threshold of dopamine do I need flooding the system in order for me to like want to feel motivated to do things and actually feel reward from doing things. And so when we're waking up in the morning and the first thing that we're doing is we're reaching for our phone, we're scrolling through Instagram, we're checking our emails, all of our notifications are pinging at us, we're jumping out of bed and we're hammering our system with coffee and, breakfasts that are really high in carbohydrates. We've flooded the system with dopamine with very little effort and very little reward. And so now the brain is saying, okay, well, this is how much dopamine that I'm actually needing before I can actually get anything done. So then what do we do in the afternoon? We're having our little crash. So we're, again, reaching for our coffee and our sugar. And now we're doom scrolling on our lunch break. And then that cycle really kind of perpetuates and continues. And so I think it's kind of a combination of both, right? Like there's this very real decline in hormones, which is happening, which is really impacting these brain chemistry it is really impacting it. But then our lifestyles, even, in the past, 10 years, how much time do we spend on phones and computers and all of these screens?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So is that why, there's recommendations out there to, don't touch your phone for the first hour when you wake up, or get up and get moving, go for a walk first thing in the morning, to combat that, the dopamine and the hit first thing in the morning, like to delay it a bit.
Yeah. And I find it can make a really, really, really big difference. It's such a small thing to implement that really costs no money.
Yeah.
Right? But it's hard. Like, it's really, really, really hard to do.
It is, especially if you're using your phone. Like I use my phone for my alarm. So when I turn off the alarm, I can immediately see if there's notifications. And you might go, oh, shoot, what's that? I need to look at that. Rather than leaving it for an hour or whatever the time you can leave it in the morning. It's tricky, but I think it's doable. It's just adjusting your lifestyle a little bit to try to make that happen.
Yeah, it becomes a really, kind of conscious, and needs to be a very conscious and intentional choice. And it'll be really hard at first. I find most of us are quite addicted to our phones. And I mean, it makes sense because it provides a lot of dopamine for us.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. What's one thing every woman, say in her 40s or 50s, can do right now to support her hormones and overall health, from your standpoint?
Oh, just one thing. I would say really working on consciously, intentionally working with that nervous system, right? So finding some time every day where we're consciously and intentionally trying to get that nervous system into a state of rest, digest, restore, replenish. And so this can, of course, include things like yoga. This can include things like breath work. This can include things like meditation. Really, it depends on what resonates with you. Because if I tell you to go home and do yoga and you hate doing yoga, it's actually not going to accomplish anywhere near what the what the intention is with that. And so,
agree.
yeah, really working with the nervous system, I think that's actually a huge shift towards where, medicine is going, especially naturopathic medicine, is focusing on, okay, well, how do we support a little bit more, calm in the nervous system? Because we can't out diet, we can't out supplement, we can't out detox,
Outrun.
we can't outrun a nervous system that feels like it is on fire.
True.
Yeah. So if a woman listening
Kind of feels
off, but can't pinpoint what it is, where do you recommend she start?
Yeah. So, of course, like even just recognizing that something's off is a good first step. What I usually find is like this perimenopausal transition can, start even 10 years before that last, period really actually comes. And so that off feeling is something that's very valid and definitely is something that's, signaling, okay, maybe there is something a little bit under the surface for us to start taking a look at. So what I usually say is start with listening. Asking, what it is that the body is really asking for with this quote unquote off feeling, and then doing a little symptom tracking, right? So when are you feeling off? Is it something that you're feeling every day? Or is it something that you're feeling in relation to your cycles?
All right.
Are you noticing it in the morning when you're waking up? Or are you noticing it after work or before you're going to bed? Right? So just kind of tuning into a little bit more as to, okay, what is that? What is it? And when is it really popping up? And then, of course, finding somebody who can help you, go a little bit deeper and ask you some of these questions about, how is your stress? How is your hydration? What are we really putting into the body? That can also be a really great step, even if we can't quite, identify what it is, and maybe there's not an obvious symptom. We can always work on, helping to improve the overall resiliency, as well as just take a little bit more of like a proactive and preventative approach to get the systems a little bit more balanced before we see, more symptoms starting to pop up.
Well, and that's the reason why I think I wanted to get you on as well, is so much of what you guys do is from a root cause. And looking at the root to everything, and even kind of putting everything together of what we've talked about today. There's a lot of overlap with things. And when it comes to menopause or perimenopause or mycotoxins or ADHD, you do need someone to kind of step back, ask you the questions, help you kind of unravel those layers and look into everything. Because it may not necessarily be what it is that you've heard on social media.
Yeah.
It may not necessarily be, because there's a lot of noise. And one of the things that I talk about, which is like what you were just referencing there, is you have to learn how to listen to yourself and listen to your body. But it's very hard for us to listen to our body because we are being fed so much from the industry, from the social media, that no, this is actually how you should be feeling. Or no, this is, all of that kind of stuff, where no one really knows how they actually feel. I remember even working with people in the past where I would say to them, like, do you feel bloated? And they're like, I have no idea what that means. And people don't really know their bodies enough. So when we can start to silence out a lot of that noise from around us, we get that opportunity to now listen to our body and to now understand what it is that it's telling us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that, links beautifully back to that nervous system piece, right? If we're in that fight or flight state, we're not going to be able to tune into our bodies very well.
No.
And so creating that space for that rest, for that rest, digest, replenish, restore, is that first step to start being able to get into the body and actually really understand, okay, what is it that I am feeling? And we're crowding out, and it provides that space to kind of shut off some of that other outside noise.
Right. Well, this has been great.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Well,
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Where can people find you or your work if they want to dig into a little bit more information or if they want to reach out for help?
Great question. So I just do clinical practice, one-on-one visits with clients at this time, and I am practicing at Aspire Medicine in Red Deer, Alberta. And so definitely, if you're needing some additional support, you can schedule a one-on-one kind of visit with me, and I'd be happy to, help sift through some of these layers and figure out, okay, what is that next right step for you?
Right. Well, this is great.
This is really helpful. It's really great information. Thank you so much.
Mycotoxin test order.
Right?
Yeah. Welcome to the rabbit hole.
Can't wait. Thanks, Tanya.
You're very welcome. It was nice seeing you both.
You too.
It was nice to meet you. Thank you so much for doing this today.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us on Breast Intentions. We hope you felt seen, supported, and maybe had a few laughs along the way. Don't forget to share, subscribe, rate, and review us. Your support keeps the conversation alive. Follow us on social media for more insights, behind-the-scenes fun, and updates on future episodes. Got a topic you want us to dive into? We'd love to hear from you. Remember, life's too short for bad bras, toxic relationships, and kale you don't actually like. So until next time, stay bold and keep your breast intentions exactly where they belong, front and center. Now go crush midlife, or at least today's to-do list. Cheers!